Right. Let's get these off. Okay. Wow. Day 3 was really fun. Okay. No spoilers, but this might get interesting. Welcome back. I'm not as late as I thought I would be, which is nice. Everything seems to be up and running. I have everything muted. That's great. Okay. So just before we start today, I got some questions on an older video of mine from AoC last year about some guy who had been trying out different languages for low-level programming, ended up using Odin, and he made a video of all the languages he considered before going with Odin. And in there he has some critiques of Nim that I'm gonna go through at the end of this. Have a look at what he has to say about Nim, and yeah, I'm not gonna spoil anything of that. But so if you stick around to the end of the stream, I'm gonna discuss a little bit about Nim for low-level programming. Oh, you almost got filtered by day 3. Ooh. Interesting. So yeah, I haven't looked at this yet. But I mentioned yesterday that we might do NPEG today. Which I had a little look at NPEG yesterday after the stream, just to prepare myself. It's been a while since I've used it. So we might have a look at that, depending on the inputs we get for today. But yeah, let's get going. Day 3, gear ratios. You and the elf eventually reach a gondola lift station. We actually have a gondola lift here to get up on the mountain and have a good view of the city. He says the gondola lift will take you up to the water source. But this is as far as he can bring you. You go inside. That's a bit ominous. It doesn't take long to find the gondolas, but there seems to be a problem. They're not moving. Well, that is a problem. Ah! You turn around to see a slightly greasy elf with a wrench and a look of surprise. Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone. The gondola lift isn't working right now. It'll still be a while before I can fix it. You offer to help. The engineer explains that an engine part seems to be missing from the engine, but nobody can figure out which one. If you can add up all the part numbers in the engine schematics, it should be easy to work out which part is missing. The engine schematic, your puzzle input, consists of a visual representation of the engine. There are lots of numbers and symbols you don't really understand, but apparently any number adjacent to a symbol, even diagonally, is a part number and should be included in your sum. So any number adjacent to a symbol, even diagonally. I don't think NPEG is going to be a good fit for this one, unfortunately. Right, is a part number and should be included in your sum. Periods do not count as a symbol. Ooh, okay. Here's an example engine schematic. So we have 4, 6, and 7, which is diagonally adjacent to the star. So I guess 7 is a part number. None of these are adjacent. This 5 here is also adjacent to this. Both this 6 and this 3 is adjacent to that. In this schematic, oh, so this is a number and it's adjacent to this, right? In this schematic, 2 numbers are not part numbers because they are not adjacent to a symbol. 114, so this one, and I'm guessing this one, yeah, 58, middle right. Every other number is adjacent to a symbol and so is a part number. Their sum is 4,361. Of course, the actual engine schematic is much larger. What is the sum of all the part numbers in the engine schematic? Right. So now it's getting a bit more interesting. This is definitely a bit trickier than what we've seen with the previous ones. We have to do sort of like a more graphical thing. Have to look a bit more at yeah. We have to sort of parse this as a number, and then we have to realize that this is diagonally adjacent to this thing. We have to parse this number, figure out that none of the numbers adjacent to it are in our, or is a symbol. Interesting. So, okay, I see two ways immediately of doing this. Yeah, the completion in the like 12 hour was 4 times lower than the, wait, what? Like the completion rate for anyone was 12 times. I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry. So I see a couple of ways we can do this. We can parse these as just parse out the numbers, but note their positions in the string. So sort of map out where they are, and then map out all the symbols, and then go through a list of numbers, and then our list of symbols, and see if any of them matches. Or we can do it sort of live and check if this number is adjacent to any symbol. It's not. We go to the next one. Is this one adjacent? It's not. Is this one adjacent? Ah, it is adjacent. And we have built up the number already. We carry on. There's no more number here. Carry on. We find this one. It's not adjacent. We find this one. It's not adjacent. Find this one. It's not adjacent. We go on. We encounter the end of a number. So we strike our number and we carry on. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do. So let's create a new file here. part1.nem. And we want to, let's just start out for line in lines of our input. Our sample. Ooh, we don't want to do this. I think we actually want to read in the entire file as one string. So let our grid be read the file sample input.txt, and then we need to import from the standard library, the stereoutils package. Read file, we want to split this on new lines like that. So this is a thing in Nim. It used to be a thing in Nim that you couldn't put these in single quotes because this was platform dependent new line. Not sure that's the case anymore, but we're going to do that anyways. So now if we echo out our grid here, we will see that we have our sample input. This one. We will see that we now have each line as its own thing in the output here. That just means that when we look at this, we can look ahead on the next line for those adjacency checks. So now we do for y and line in grid. So now y is going to start at 0 and go down. Line is of course going to be the current line, and then for x and character in the line, So now we have three things. We have X, we have Y, and we have our character. So if we just echo those out, we will see that we have, sort of going from the top of the file, we have a 4, 6, 7 at X, XY 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, and so on. And that we can use, oh, my Vim bugged out there for a second. We need a variable to track our current number. I'm just going to do this as a string for now. So if C in digits, and we remember that the digits is a set of characters from stereoutils, which is just the set of all the digits. If it's in there, the current number, we just add this character to it. Otherwise, so if it's not in digits, we set current number back to be the empty string. And for every time we wrap a line, we'll also set current number to be this. And let us, when we null this out, let's just echo out the current number there, so we can see that we're actually building the correct numbers that we expect. Yeah, so 467, 114, 35, 633. Those should match with, yeah, those are the numbers here. Of course, we got a lot of empty ones because we're resetting every time. That should be fine. So if we're finding a number, we need to check every number around us, right? So we need to go for YY in 0.2, so 0, 1, or 2. So that's going to be, oh, actually, let's do -1, ... 1, and then do the same for our X here. So that now we iterate our numbers from a Y offset. Let's call these like X offset and Y offset. So the offset that we're checking is -1 to 1 and -1 to 1. Well, I guess for you, it's going to be the other way around. And we're going to check. So if Y plus Y offset is larger or equal to 0, and Y plus YO is smaller than the current lines, the grid's length, so the amount of characters or the amount of lines in our grid. Let's throw on another and do this for X plus XO, and X and XO is larger than or smaller than the length of the line. So this is just a check to see that the position that or the character that we want to check is in fact inside of our line area. We could, of course, have done this in here by tweaking the ranges, but we did it this way. So we could then do if grid Y plus YO, X plus XO. This is now our the character that we're checking. So if it's not in the set of digits, plus the set of just the dot character, so if it's anything that is not a digit or a dot, then we know we have a character. or a part, I guess, is the, whoops. So if we now do this, we will see it echo out the parts that we find. Yeah, range error here. Can fix that in a second. So star star square square star plus the star. Ooh. Right. So this finds the star. Then this finds the star. This finds the star. So we have 3 stars. Then we have a square. 3 stars and a square. That's good. But index out of bounds, the container is empty. This is because when we're splitting on new lines, this has an implicit new line at the end of it, probably. Let me just echo out the grid there to be sure. Yeah, so we have an empty line all the way at the end here. So this is gonna try to check in this string. So we're just gonna cut that off from the end. Just make sure that we have the whole grid still. Yeah, there we go. We need to make sure when we give it the actual input that this is the case here as well. But it should be. So now all of that works. And we need to track if we have hit a part. So is part, just set that to false. If you find a part, we set is part is true. And then, so this means that we have found a number. So we go through, is part is 0, current number is 4, current number is 46, is part is still false, current number is 467, is part is now true, and when we then encounter this one, we know that we need to add the current number to the sum because it's a part. So in this case, it will build the current number, but when it goes to reset it, is part would be false. It hasn't set it yet. And in this case, is part is set all the way at the beginning. This 3 doesn't see it, but is part isn't reset until we find this, and it knows that it should add this one. So down here, if is part is true, and let's actually, since we have 2 resets here, let us create a small procedure. Just call it reset number, which just does if is part. Well, we can just do that because it's a Boolean. If this is a part, then the sum, which we haven't created yet, sum plus equals parse int current number. And in either case, we set current number to the empty string and is part to be false. So if we now replace these 2 with reset number, there we go. This should now, so every time we reset the number, it does this check, and we add up the sum. So here we are ending here before the end of the line. But it should, yeah, it should run at the end of each check of a full line. So this should work. Okay, so let us echo out the sum. Do this. 4361. 4361 is what we expected there. So that appears to be good. We're going to save this, our puzzle input, in the day3 folder, input.txt. And we want to have a look at this. These lines are just... I have the text size set way up for you guys because it got a bit hard to see in the previous streams. So yeah, these lines are just way longer than the lines in our test input. Shouldn't matter for our code. It should work fine. I just want to check that the last line in our output is this line because we're splitting off. We're doing this here, this range check. So we do this like cut off the last one because it was empty in our test input. So we're gonna just check that it's still that still applies to this. The last line, it spits out 353, 914, 105. Yeah, that is the last one. So that's good. We can remove this. Oops. Run nim again. And here we have what should now be our answer. That's the right answer. You are 1 gold star closer to restoring snow operations. Solitude asks, I don't remember, did you full clear previous years? Full clear? Is that doing all of them? In that case, no. Christmas always gets crazy. I don't have time to do this all the way up until Christmas. And I mean, even like the day after Christmas. For us, we celebrate Christmas on the 24th. This goes on to the 25th. I'm with family. I'm typically not even on my computer. And this year I'm traveling for Christmas to visit my in-laws, so I'm not going to bring all of this stuff. Part 2. If that's not what full clear is, then please explain the term. Right, someone on YouTube said, my solution was ultimately backwards of what I should probably have done. In my defense, it was 2 a.m. Backwards. I wonder, oh, did you look for parts first and then numbers? Yeah, that sounds a bit backwards. The engineer finds the missing part and installs it in the engine. As the engine springs to life, you jump into the closest gondola, finally ready to ascend to the water source. You don't seem to be going very fast though. Maybe something is still wrong. Fortunately, the gondola has a phone labeled help, so you pick it up and the engineer answers. Before you can explain the situation, she should suggest that you look out the window. There stands the engineer, holding a phone in one hand and waving with the other. You're going so slowly that you haven't even left the station. You exit the gondola. The missing part wasn't the only issue. One of the gears in the engine is wrong. A gear is any star symbol that is adjacent to exactly 2 part numbers. Its gear ratio is the result of multiplying those 2 numbers together. Its gear ratio, alright. This time you need to find the gear ratio of every gear and add them all up so that the engineer can figure out which gear needs to be replaced. Consider the same engine schematic again. In this schematic there are 2 gears. So this would be a gear, or this would be a gear because it has these 2 numbers next to it, and this would be a gear because it has these 2 numbers next to it. In this schematic, there are 2 gears. The first is in the top left. It has part numbers 467 and 35. So its gear ratio is 16,345. The second gear is the lower right. Its gear ratio is, about 500,000. The star adjacent to 617 is not a gear. This one. Because it is only adjacent to 1 part number. adding up all the gear numbers, gear ratios produces this number. Okay, okay. Bit trickier there. Nothing we can't handle, I think. Part 2. Yeah, so again, I like to copy my part 1 solution to my part 2 solution and then start solving in a separate file. Just the way I like to do it. So I can see why you would want to do this one the other way around, but we can do a little tweak. So we now check if it's a part. We can check if it is a gear, and then we can store this number in sort of the position of the gear. So we can say, well, this is stored in the position, like the XY position of this gear. Then we get to this one, and it tries to add, but it sees that it already has this one. Times them together, adds that to the sum. And then it carries on. You might even be able, well, no. I was thinking we could do some optimization, like keep this is a gear, but if this had been a star, that would break, because this would store, yeah, it wouldn't work. So what we can do, the probably easiest way is to just pull in a table, a hash table here. A hash table is maybe a bit big for this use case, but that should be fine. So let's try LSP rename again. Is part to is gear. Well, it seems to have worked fine this time. So yeah, now we just have gears, which is a table from a tuple xy int to an integer, a number. So yeah, if this is a gear, of course, the check for gear should now be that this is exactly equal to the gear symbol. That means it's a gear. When we reset the number, if this is a gear, we no longer just blindly add to the sum. We say if gears, so we can't just store true or false here. We need to store, okay, let's do this. LSP rename, and call this for gear pos instead. And gear pos is now a tuple. Well, actually, let's just explicitly give it a tuple like that. Down here, we say that this is -1 and -1. Here, we store the x plus xo, y plus yo, like that. So now, gear pos, and of course we need to check here that it's not this sort of sentinel value. So sentinel value, instead of storing a separate Boolean field, we use a sentinel value, which basically just says, like, this is a special value, don't do anything in particular with it. It's the same idea as a null pointer. So just a special number that means something else than what the data type might suggest. Let's do that. So gear position, if the gear position is not this, then we check if the gears table, if gears dot has this gear pos. So if there is already a gear in the table with this at this position, then we say that the sum should be plus equals gears at the gear pos plus %int of the current number. Otherwise, we say that gears at gear pos should be the % of the current number. I think we might be running into a type error here. That is not the error I expected, I think. Oh, right, it's not has, it's contains. There we go. Oh, okay, that worked. I was worried that maybe this having explicitly named fields would mess with this, but apparently not. So yeah, a nym is smart enough to have a hash procedure for this tuple. That I think should be everything we need. So run this on our sample input. Ooh, that is not the number we expected. So even the first one here is way higher. What is going on? This should not be a plus, that should be a times. That would certainly help. That looks better. 467,835. Yep. So it's good on our test input. That means it's time to run it on our true input. Again, this with like keeping a table and doing all of that might be a bit, it might not be the best data structure for this. It might be a bit overkill, but the input here is so small that it doesn't really matter. And yeah, that's the right answer. 1 gold star closer to restoring snow operations. Cool. Yeah, not too crazy there. Basically, as we encounter the numbers, we store them in a table indexed by their position, and then we just check, have we seen this gear before? If we have, add it to the table. Or if we have seen it before, it's a gear with 2 numbers, so we do the summing. Otherwise, store it. Maybe someone will come across it later and add it to the sum. In any case, our solution works. So for those of you who haven't seen this, all my solutions are on GitHub. So my parts, part 2, and the input, day 3. Yeah, I'm gonna do that afterwards. So if you go to PMunch/AoC 2023, you will find my solutions. You will also find a link to the YouTube playlist of all the videos. So I store all the videos there as I go. You can have a look at the older ones. Bold assumption that only 1 or 2 part numbers are adjacent to a gear. Oh, wait. Was that? Wait. Did I just get lucky with my inputs here? Oh yeah, exactly 2 part numbers. Oh, so I might have gotten lucky there with my input. So yeah, in my case, if if this one had been shifted over by 1, had been here, then it would have found this, considered this a gear, counted it all up, and then when it got to this one, it would have seen this. It would already be 3, and it wouldn't. My solution wouldn't be correct. The fix for this, of course, is to just store these. So in our part 2 here, instead of just storing one number, we would store a sequence of numbers, and then all the way at the end, so instead of doing the sum, we would always just add to the sequence. At the end here, we would go through, find only those that had 2 numbers, add them together onto the sum. So maybe I got lucky with my inputs, but it's doable without too much refactoring. And yeah, you say no problem. The input is clean that way. You also got a maximum of 2 outputs, or two parts on a gear. There's a more solution or more comments here on YouTube as well. Casey still says, yes, my solution was symbol centric, which means maintaining a visited set to avoid duplicates. It helped a bit when the second solution, but it would refactor. Yeah. So basically what I was saying, they're looking at the symbols and not the numbers first. Use advent of code every year to learn a new language, and this year it was NIM. So far, you're quite impressed. Reasonable, orthogonal, and consistent instruction set, and a surprisingly complete library. Yeah. Modern software engineering. If you don't feel the bug, ship it. Yeah. Yeah, NIM is pretty capable. The standard library is pretty complete as well. It has a lot of different stuff. Sometimes I would have wished for a bit more cohesion, maybe, but it's not too bad. It's pretty nice language. Another comment on Twitch. Gee, what yo undescribed? Oh, what I described now is exactly what you did with the storing in a tuple with an extra one, or when I was talking to the other guy and tracking parts instead of numbers. Either way. So yeah, yeah, that's it for today. Before we end the advent of code part of this stream, let's look at this. So now we can see more of the island. Tomorrow we're going to be up here on the mountain. And this is the island. We have the gondola, I'm guessing, going up here. I really like these ASCII art graphics for this. It's really, they're always well done. Always nice to see. You can see if you go back, just edit the link here. Yeah, I got to day 6 last time. I'm guessing it filled out this this forest. I think we're heading into a forest. Some of the days you can see more from the start. Here it appears we're, I think, was this the one where we were heading out with a... Oh, we're in a submarine, weren't we? Yeah, I think so. Did I do 2020? Yeah. Ooh, 2020 was pretty good. Got all the way up to Christmas. I missed a star here. Yeah, this was some flight thing. I think I might have done this after the fact. I really like the worm there. Anyways. So as I said, I got some comments here on an older stream of mine. I think it was actually last year's stream. But I got some comments. There was this guy, This guy here, his name was Rikard Andersson. I guess he sounds at least he sounds Scandinavian. It might be Rickard Anderson if he's not. But the name sounds Scandinavian enough. And he had some comments about Nim, and I guess I could do this. I could pipe the audio through. I think we won't get copyright claimed. But I can't hear it without my headset on.
You know, it has that kind of feeling, right? And I like Golang. Give you
Let's just find the
clear control. With that said, Odin.
There we go.
All right. Number 6. Nim.
Yeah. Just before he gets going, a bit of back story on this. Someone sent this to me, as I said. The video is titled "Languages I Considered Using Before Odin," and it's an answer to a question that he has gotten from one of his viewers, and he appears to be doing low-level programming of some sort. I'm not exactly sure what, but he has a lot of Odin videos. So someone asked me what I thought of this and what I felt was the or if I thought this could be fixed. Someone said he's quiet. Is that the guy in the video? I'll try to match his levels. Let's just hear what he has to say.
At some point, I thought my first view of Nim was, oh, this is basically just sort of a lower level Python, right? Sort of ish. It has some, you know, it has that kind of feeling, right? And there are certain things that I do think are kind of interesting about Nim. I do think that it's certainly a fairly, like on the surface, it looks readable, this language, right? But there are a few things that I have sort of learned while trying to learn Nim and so on, trying to get into it. I learned that I do not find this readable at all in practice, this language. It is essentially unreadable in actual code bases for a few reasons. And so if we were to, actually, we can use this as an example. Nim has overloading, function overloading, right? It also has uniform function call syntax that we saw in dlang, which is interesting, right? That's cool, right? But one of the things that Nim does is it absolutely does not at all, and the ecosystem does not do this, they do not do specific imports. They also don't do qualified imports. So when you import macros, you're getting everything, right? When you import string utils here, you get everything. Same with string format here, right? These functions that you're getting the whole thing, right? And if one of those happen to be an overload for something you're doing, you will just get that overload or whatever, right? It's an incredibly messy language, right? On top.
So this is a comment or a critique that I've heard many times. People especially coming from Python, where it's very common to say, no, only import the things that you use. So you say from module, import this, import that. Of course, in Nim, we can do that. I could have said, instead of having this like import everything thing, I could have said from string-utils import split, and actually we don't use digits in this code, but we use parsint. So I could have done that. Let's just import all of tables. We do use digits. So like that. We could do this, and this works. We could also say import nil, I think it is. And then we have to do stereoutils dot split. Now we need to qualify all of our calls. So now that should work. If you spell correctly, then it works. So you can do this. You can qualify your imports if you want to, but, and this is the big but where this sort of argument falls a bit flat. If I have my own module, so for example, custom stereoutils.nym, and if in my code I import custom stereoutils, right? Important and not used. And now if I, let's say I want to have my own parseInt method. So I do a proc for parseInt. I say that x is a string, and it returns an int. And I just say it always returns 42, the best number. And of course, in them we need to explicitly say that we export this. So already there we have a little bit of safety in that we need to explicitly export our stuff. We need to say this is part of my sort of API. If I now generate the documentation for this module, we will see that if I do this and I just open this HTML file that it spit out, we will see, okay, it opened that in a different browser, but we will see that we now have this parseInt exported. If we now wrote a parse float, for example, but we didn't export that, and this returns a float, and it just 40.0 or 42.0. As you can see, immediately we get a warning here. It's declared but not used, because we're not exporting it. Nim sees that we're not using it anywhere in this module. And if we now try to generate the documentation for this and open it again, we will see that we still only have this parseInt. This is the only thing that is exported from our module. So already there we have a little bit of safety that we need to explicitly export stuff. But now what happens in our custom stereoutils? Now that we import this and we have this ambiguity between stereoutils and custom stereoutils, well, what we see is that we get compiler errors. If I now try to compile this part too, we will get ambiguous call, both stereoutils.parseInt x of string, which is a function declared in stereoutils, and custom stereoutils.parseInt string, which is declared in this module, matched for the argument of string. So it's not really ambiguous. It won't allow us to do this ambiguity. What I can do to resolve this now is import std stereoutils except parseInt. And now, okay. For some reason, my editor didn't pick up on that. But as you can see, it now compiles. This number is now wildly incorrect because all of these parseInt just returns 42. But yeah, here we can see that we import this, but we don't import this because we're getting parseInt from here. So Nim won't allow us to have that ambiguity. It won't allow us to end up in these situations where we don't know what we're calling. Of course, some people don't like that You don't have to do this. I do like that. It's less typing for me. And he gets into this later in the video. He says that Nim focuses on typing and not on debugging, which I do kind of agree on. I'll concede that it is focused around writing code, and it isn't as explicit. But this can only come from one place, and if you have editor tools, here I'm using Nim-LSP, we can say that we can see that parseInt, it comes from the stereotils module. Nim looks at this statically, sees that this is an integer, parseInt, it only comes from this module. It knows where it comes from. And if you have proper editor support, it's not a problem. You can always tell where your functions are coming from. And yes, I know I should set up my editor to do the hints and stuff automatically, so I don't actually have to type LSP hover when I want to hover stuff. But that's beside the point. If you have editor support, this isn't a problem.
On top of that, the templates that they write, the macros and so on, do not seem to have any concept of hygiene and so on in practice.
Right. Let me just back up a bit here. So he has talked about what I've been talking about
at all,
now.
And the ecosystem does not do this. They do not do specific imports. They also don't do qualified imports. So when you import macros, you're getting everything, right? When you import string utils here, you get everything. Same with string format here, right? These functions that you're getting the whole thing, right? And if one of those happen to be an overload for something you're doing, you will just get that overload or whatever, right? It's incredibly messy language, right? On top of that, the templates that they write, the macros and so on, do not seem to have any concept of hygiene and so on in practice and so on. So, for example, one of the libraries that I was looking into at some point.
This is weird. He says that macros don't have any concept of hygiene. I'm not sure he mentions the library. It's a library I haven't used. Macros are hygienic. You can mark them as dirty. You can do some things to inject code into the call site. But by default, they're hygienic. So much of his critique here is not so much Nim as a language, but more people doing weird things in Nim. And I've mentioned this in my talks. I've talked about macros various places, on both online and in presentations in real life. And one of my favorite analogies is that macros is like a chainsaw. It's way faster to cut down a tree with a chainsaw than with a handsaw, but it's also way faster to chop your own leg off. I would still use a chainsaw if I were to cut down a bunch of trees, but I would have to be careful with them. I would have to take care, and I would have to do things properly and not do silly things like creating dirty macros that inject stuff into the call site. So he has had a bad experience with a library that isn't doing things properly with macros. And of course, that it's possible to do these things could be a critique. I get that. But in general, in macros, you have to explicitly add stuff. And yeah. I've gotten some comments while I've talked here. Yeah, someone doing these in C, which is apparently a bit painful. Yeah, string parsing in C is annoying. Inadvertent collisions. yeah, so Casey over on YouTube agrees with him. It's too easy to import a new module that creates conflicts with existing identifiers. Namespaces are part of almost every modern language. Again, yes, if you import a module that collides with, like, naming wise with another module, you will get collision errors. I've been using Nim for many years now. It quite rarely happens, and that is because Nim is strictly and statically typed. So you don't have the concept of a namespace in the same way, but we are strict about types. So if I have one, so the map function, for example, we used that yesterday in our day 2. So if you have a look at this code, here we import string utils and sec utils. They have some of the same things, I think, but it doesn't matter because we are applying functions to a type, and that type is what sort of namespaces are functions. The one big benefit of doing it this way is that I can sort of augment the module. I'm not building things up for classes and stuff like that. So I can, it's more the functional idea of data as code, and you can attach and do all of that stuff. But yes, you do have a problem of imports creating conflicts, but I would much rather, when I import and get a conflict, solve that conflict with doing what we saw here earlier of doing custom utils dot parsint when I need to disambiguate, instead of having to always be explicit every time, even though there is no other possible option. It's the same thing. I would much rather be able to say, let C equals this, instead of having to explicitly say that this is a color. Because this expression can only ever return a color. So Nim is able to say to see, yes, this is a color, like this enum defined up here. And it's the same thing with this. I would much rather have Nim just be smart about it and don't require me to type stuff out, like spoon feed it information that it already knows, and then have to disambiguate once in a blue moon, rather than having to specify every single time. But yes, you will occasionally run across a situation where you do have a conflict between identifiers. Yeah, and then there's a quote from Bjarne Stroustrup. Famously wrote that C allowed you to shoot yourself in the foot. C++ makes it harder, but if you do, you blow your whole leg off. That's a bit different to what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's any harder or easier to do something wrong in Nim. I'm just saying that with greater amount of power, you also have an equal opportunity to use that power to mess up your code. Yeah, I know that quote was in reference to macros, but with macros, when I'm writing a macro, if I do it right, I get a lot of power. If I do it wrong, all that power is now turned into something bad. It's not that it's necessarily easier or harder to mess things up, but if you go out and use that powerful tool, you will also have powerful repercussions, so to speak. Yeah, someone on Twitch commented that, funny enough, the Wikipedia entry for hygienic macros lists nim as an example language. Yeah. Again, I'm not sure where this unhygienic macro thing comes from. Nim macros are hygienic by default. Let's get back to his critiques.
Point was called nim stew result. It's the result type and so on. And I found out that one of the macros, or several of the macros in this library, and most of it was macros, by the way, which is not super great, was basically...
That's a weird comment to me. It's a lot of macros, and that's not great, because macros are great for their use cases. Zero cost abstractions. You pretty much have to do some kind of meta programming, and you typically end up using macros. Macros aren't bad if you're using them for what they're supposed to be doing. I haven't looked at the library he's talking about, but
basically referring to things that weren't even in scope, right? A macro can effectively just add random code into the call site in nim. They have no concept of, hey, should the compiler see that this is in scope or whatever it might be. It is just sort of Rambo, right? And I find that this is not for me, right? We talked about before, I think that there are certain languages that focus on...
That's not for me either. I mean, that's what C macros are basically. Just copy paste, like string copy paste into your call site, and it doesn't check anything. That's not what nim does. I'm not sure. I think he have misunderstood something about how macros in nim work. Nim has a bit more magic. As I said, it does resolve types automatically. For example, it just figures out imports without having to spoon feed information to a compiler that already knows stuff. And he might have just seen that stuff he didn't expect to worked. And been confused about what was going on. Yeah, if he's talking about the results lib from they're mostly templates, not macros. Oh, that's... So is he just talking about templates, not about macros? Not that it matters, those are also hygienic. But, yeah.
The wrong thing, right? nim is very much focusing on the wrong things. And there are two things that kind of, I think, illustrate this, right? You might not agree, but I think illustrate this. One, macros are super important in nim. They overuse them, they use them all the time, right? This basically points to, well, the problem is obviously writing code. Writing code is the problem. I don't agree. I think debugging code is the problem. Understanding code is the problem. Having everything be over abstracted is the problem, right? Because those things actually, when I'm sitting down and trying to fix something, at the end of the day, all those things are making it harder to actually fix the problem, right? The problem is simply, I don't understand what this is doing and how is that possible. I've been working on this code base for half a year, right? That's the problem in some sense. And I think that certain languages have a very easy time ending up in that position. I would say nim seems to me like a prime example of this, right? So number one is it overfocuses on metaprogramming and abstracting the writing of code and so on and so forth, right? That's number one. Number two is there's absolutely zero way to actually control allocation in this language. They don't have custom.
Let's just stop him there before he goes on to talk about memory management. I do get his point here. nim is focusing on writing code. A lot of people attracted to nim are attracted to nim because it has metaprogramming, because it allows you to write code that writes code and all the power that comes with that. It's certainly one of the things that interested me when I first found the language. But, and as he says, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I disagree, but I don't necessarily disagree for the reasons he mentioned. He says that when he sits down with code, he wants to know what's going on. He wants to be able to read the code. And he finds that harder when the code is more abstract instead of more specific, I guess. And that is fair. That is completely understandable. That reading straightforward code is easier than reading sort of more abstract code. My problem with this argument is that a lot of other languages that I've come across have a lot of boilerplate. You end up with a lot of patterns that you have to do. You have to write everything in a certain pattern to make sure that you're doing things correctly. For an example, a locking pattern. So a locking pattern, you might just say something like this and then something like that. But that's not the way you should do it, because you're now, like, if this throws an exception, you're now no longer unlocking your lock. So what you should be doing is to do something like this and put these in there and then have this finally and then unlocking that finally. So this is what you should be doing. And this is a pattern, a thing you just have to do every single time, and it adds noise. I've looked at languages, like I used to write C# for my job, and I'm guessing from his critiques that he doesn't like C# either. But in many languages like that, you end up writing a lot of the same code over and over and over again. And if you take a shortcut, you risk introducing bugs. The thing that I like with them is that with a simple template, not even a macro, we could have written this like this in them. So now instead of, we have only introduced one line. We have introduced a level of indentation that makes it explicit that this happens with this lock held. And it's shorter, it's more succinct, it's in my mind, and he might not agree, but in my mind, this is easier to read because I can focus on what's going on instead of making sure that all my patterns are done correctly. So I can go through this code and say, okay, this happens with this lock, and I know in my mind that this lock is held in here, and it's held on these two lines, and I know that when we get out of this, no matter how we get out of it, the lock is freed. It's only held during this part. And that frees my mind up to think about the business logic in my code. And that is sort of my counter argument for macros, that he doesn't like them because he feels they abstract stuff away. It makes it harder to read. And again, great power, a great responsibility and all of that. If you write macros which are the right abstractions for what you're trying to do, they're great for readability. They're great for maintainability. They're great to, when you go into your code, to look at your code and just know that it's right. It also makes it way easier to refactor things. I had a project, one of my first projects that I wrote on my blog. I wrote about read and maintainability of code with an example of macros, and I'm working on a follow-up to that article because it's been a couple of years. I've maintained this project. I've been using it. I've rebased, I've shuffled around the code. I've done it a couple of different ways, but I've kept my macros because they were the right abstractions, and I could always change what happens in the macro, and the abstraction just works all the way throughout the code. So if you're doing macros right, if you're using the correct abstractions, I don't run into this problem. If you're using the wrong abstractions, or if you're doing unexpected things in your code, then yes, you will create less readable code. It's the same thing with comments. If you start lying in a comment, so it's a notorious example. You write a comment, and then you update the code later on, but the comment still stays because nothing checks if the comment is correct. And someone comes reading through the code, sees the comment, and then takes the comment at face value, but it doesn't work. Like the code doesn't work that way anymore. So that is, it's the same kind of thing. Like if you do the wrong things, you do get bad results. But if you're using these abstractions in good ways, then you get good results. But I see, like, this to me is one of his more valid points. It certainly is easier to create code that is hard to read in NIM if you don't use the abstractions right. Some more comments here. I would agree that undocumented macros can be extremely hard to understand if you did not write them, which is why everyone recommends the proc template macro path. Yeah, poorly documented macros, as I said, macros that do unexpected things are not great. Proc template macro path, that's pick the construct with the sort of the least pick the weakest construct that you can, which works for your use case. Like don't do macros for everything, but you sort of have this level of power. So if procedures aren't good enough, you can try doing something with a template. If a template isn't good enough, you can try doing it with a macro, and that is good advice to begin with. But for example, to just a callback to what we were talking about at the beginning of today, we were talking about NPEG. Just briefly, we talked about this yesterday. It's a great parsing library for NIM, and it's a macro. It's a nice, basically it's one big macro. It's super well documented. It doesn't do anything unexpected, and that means that it just works, and it allows us to write parsers that I can read. I can look at this code and know what it does. NIM knows what it does because it compiles to hygienic, nice NIM code that goes through the parser, and I get errors if it doesn't work. It even on compile time, it can print out graphs of what the parser is actually doing, It explains itself. Literally, it explains the syntax back to myself. So if I wrote something that I maybe didn't understand, I could have a look at the diagram. And it's just a prime example of if you're using macros right, they're great. But it's easy to, or it's not, maybe not easy, but you can certainly use bad macros. Someone here says it's repeating yourself, which I do a lot in C#, and sometimes use nim to write C# for me. Yeah. Again, repetition. You end up writing the same code over and over again. My article that I wrote, that I mentioned yesterday on labeled exceptions, is again another example of where I think adding, like sprinkling in a little bit of macros allows us to write more concise, more easy to read code. I always want my code to be as readable, as understandable, and as easy to follow the flow of what I actually want my program to be doing. Not how it's doing it. I don't care if it's a try finally blocking situation. I just want to know that it works, and I want to have a look at my code logic. ChatGPT comment plugin would actually be pretty cool. Yeah, went for a NIM solution today as well. How did that go? It's hopefully it went well. Let's see some more comments here on YouTube. What I like about C is that the syntax is very simple. That is true. Well, it has some dark corners, but what you see for the most part is pretty simple. It makes code very easy to reason about, but I think it is important to find a balance between simplicity and elegance. It makes code easy to reason about if you know exactly how computers work, or if you know like all of the stuff about pointers and memory, and it's not a good beginner language, I don't think, unless you're getting into computer science. If I wanted to introduce a friend of mine who, for example, studies economics and wants to take a step up from Excel, I wouldn't introduce them to C. Templates and macros makes the code more elegant but harder to reason about. Yeah, well, again, if you do it right, I think it's easier. If you don't do it right, for sure, it's harder. Without templates and macros, I think NIM is more readable than C++ and Rust. Yeah, I mean, it all depends on how you're using them. You have to use them right. Of course, we also have. I mean, here I'm using a macro. Mapit was the template, I think. Yeah, it's a template or a macro. It takes typed and untyped. It's a template. And it works. It's super easy to read. I can see Mapit. It introduces the it variable. Might be a bit confusing, but it allows us to do cool things without passing in a closure thing. It just works. And of course, if we run this, I'm not sure this works on templates actually, but we can try. Expand macros. Mapit. Macro? Yeah. Okay, it's not a macro, so that doesn't work. But you can use the expand macro compile time switch. Expand macro compile time switch to expand out what NIM thinks a macro is doing, or what it knows that it's doing. Your NIM solution went all right. I parsed the symbols and numbers into structures first in part 1, made part two a bit easier, I guess, but more code. Yeah. Um, for learning them, it's definitely a good thing, I think, to put things into structures and make something sort of use more of the features. Star being declare pointer and deref is my biggest complaint about C. Yeah, that is a bit confusing. Someone sent me a gist. I'm guessing that is the nim code. Yeah, we can have a look at that maybe afterwards. Let's get back to if he has any more complaints here.
Two is there's absolutely zero way to actually control allocation in this language. They don't have custom allocators. It is effectively really not competing with any of the languages that I thought it was competing with. Nim is not competing with D, C, C++, Rust, Zig, Odin, right? I do think even Rust has a better chance at sort of being straightforward when it comes to allocation and so on. Though it should be mentioned, Rust, of course, has kind of shit support for custom allocators, right? They also don't really focus on the right things, right? But I think Nim is perhaps even worse, right? So from that perspective, Nim has not really been the alternative for me, right? I think it focuses on the wrong things. It has added features also that simply no one, I think, in the universe asked for, right? And it seems in some ways like a research vehicle.
So custom allocators. This is a bit of a strange one. Nim, it is true, or sorry, some of the languages he mentioned in that list has the concept of like you declare an allocator and all the memory that sort of goes on the heap you have to allocate through an allocator. And it says Nim doesn't have any support for that, which is partially true. Like you don't have a way that you can easily say, I want all these sort of sec allocations, like sequence allocations, to go through this allocator. Of course, we do have the different memory management strategies, like the ref counting and the arc and orc and all of that stuff. But he then goes on to say that it doesn't compete with languages, and he lists a lot of languages, among them C and C++. And that I find kind of weird, because Nim, of course, if you've been using it, has the ability to allocate manually. And with arc and orc, you have lifetime tracing hooks. So, for example, in my wrapper of a library called Map'em, Math's arbitrary precision math library. This is a wrapper of a C library, and you call init Map'em, which wraps a couple of different ways of allocating and assigning numbers to Map'em numbers. And then I have written lifetime tracing hooks, which then deallocate these when they go out of scope. So in a way, like these are not using Nim's allocator. They're using whatever the Map'em C library uses to allocate these. And this is a really old C library which is focused on portability, so I'm guessing it just uses malloc. I don't actually know. I didn't check. I know that I need to free these when I get them back. So I set up lifetime tracing hooks that frees them, make sure all the memory has been freed. So yeah, it doesn't have the concept of like creating an allocator and again having to manually sort of feed that allocator into allocations, and you can allocate as I said, for example, sequence somewhere else than through the nim allocation. But it does allow you to manually allocate memory and set up lifetime tracing hooks to deallocate them again. So you can certainly write your own allocators. And you can sort of do all of this stuff. It might be a bit trickier than in some of these other languages. But it's a weird critique. I'm not entirely sure what he wants to get out of custom allocators. I'm sure we could find a way to do that in nim if I knew what he was actually wanting to use custom allocators for. But yeah, it's a bit of an odd critique. But I think I get where he's going with it, that if you do use the standard library, if you do use sort of the nim managed types, you don't have a way to override how nim allocates and deallocates that memory, which is true. But if you have your own types, you can do whatever you want with them, including allocating them elsewhere and deallocating them yourself, and setting all this up to be done automatically. Yeah, you also disagree that it doesn't compete with those languages. And someone asks, aren't you doing embedded nim stuff as well? Indeed, I am. I've written nim that runs on an Atene 85. I have a project. I think I popped the mic again. I have a project in front of me here where I'm running. I have a keyboard with a like track point thing, all hooked up to a Teensy, which I'm currently programming in nim to be a keyboard and mouse combination that is going to just be like plug in a USB, get a mouse and keyboard out of that. It's all written in nim, runs on a microcontroller, uses a couple of kilobytes of memory. I'm not sure. Yeah, yeah, that's pretty low level. So I'm not quite sure why he think nim doesn't compete in this space. Just because it doesn't have a certain flavor of a feature that he wants to use for something. I think he has one more complaint.
Right. And it seems in some ways like a research vehicle for the creator of nim more than anything, right? So instead of kind of fixing these types of things where, well, I would like custom allocators, this seems pretty basic for a lower level language. It is instead the case that nim is just really not a lower level language, really, right? It just is not appropriate for the same use cases. If you wanted to kind of optimize stuff in nim, you would have to essentially indirectly try to do those things, right? Talking about allocation and stuff like this, instead of directly talking about them and have some semblance of control and order, right? So nim, unfortunately, was a major disappointment to me when I actually looked into it. It really didn't fit at all what I thought nim was supposed to be honest. It is, however, probably an interesting language for someone who might want an alternative to something like OCaml or Haskell, maybe. Because I don't think it can compete in any way with lower level languages, really. But yeah, so that's nim.
Again, I've gone through a lot of his other critiques here. He mentions that nim has a lot of features that no one really asked for, and that it seems like a research vessel for the creator. I'm not entirely sure which features in particular he is talking about, so it's kind of hard to address this one. Andreas has been sort of using nim as a way to try out different things and different paradigms. So a bit of the critique here, I guess, is warranted. Yeah, I haven't used OCaml or Haskell. I'm not trying to replace either of those. I'm trying to replace C mostly in my life, and C++ and C# and Python and JavaScript, pretty much all the languages at this point. Yeah, again, he mentions this about custom allocators, that it isn't useful for lower level stuff, which again I find a bit odd. Yes, if you, yeah, I'm not gonna go into that all again. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Either he has some misunderstandings about nim, or he doesn't like that nim, the way that nim does these things. In my experience, nim has been great for low level programming. I've used it a lot. I've used it professionally, and I have my own set of complaints about nim. Don't get me wrong; it's not a perfect language, but a lot of these critiques seems to be coming from someone who is coming at nim from sort of a wrong angle. He seems to have made an idea about what nim was going to be in his head, and he started looking at it, and it didn't fit what he thought it was going to be, or thought it was going to look like, or behave like. And instead of trying to use the language the way that you're supposed to use the language, he was frustrated that it didn't do things the way he expected them to be done. And everyone does this. I do it myself. I'm not saying that he was holding it wrong or anything, but it seems like he got off with nim on a bad foot, and it's might have tainted his view on nim, and that's fine. I mean, nim probably isn't for everyone. But yeah. I think my only problem with nim, I'm reading a comment now, by the way. I think my only problem with nim is that there's not many large projects that give confidence that it can write very fast code. Yeah, switching to mim-alloc can increase perf by 20%, so I don't get how custom allocators aren't important for low level. I'm not saying that they aren't important. I'm just saying that the features I think he wants from custom allocators you can do in nim. You can, yeah. Some more comments here from YouTube, I think. Yeah, true. I think that C is not a great beginner language if you want to focus on functionality over how the computer works. Maybe Golang would be a good option, or nim, or something with memory management. Yeah. If I were to introduce, I mean, my example was an economist wanting to up their Excel game, I would probably introduce them to Python or R, or something more sort of specifically tailored for that direction. Are there actually a lot of reasons to use a custom allocator? Does it really make a difference? There are reasons to use a custom allocator. They can give you some benefits, some difference, as this guy over on Twitch mentioned. Switching to mim-alloc can increase perf by 20%. I'm not sure what that's a benchmark of, or how it works, or how that 20% is measured. but custom allocators can definitely do certain things. They can help with certain scenarios. If you have, sometimes you want to do things differently, maybe because you have a lot of, you don't have a lot of memory, or you have some fast memory, some slow memory. Maybe you want to differentiate, or a whole host of other reasons. So you can do a lot of stuff with memory management, and some of it matters quite a bit. It was a proprietary project you were working on that was pretty memory heavy. Memory allocations, speeding up memory allocations. If you're doing a lot of memory allocations and you speed up memory allocations, your code is faster. That is not a secret. Oops. But yeah. I think that's it for today. This stream has gone on for quite a while now. I've gone through, of course, we were doing Advent of Code. We did this, and then I had a video from someone with some critiques of NIM that they wanted me to go through. So we've been looking through those. I hope I answered them in a good way for whoever left that comment. Thanks for the stream, someone says. Thank you for watching. And for all the comments. And yeah, this has been a good stream. A lot of people have been active. I like that. If you want, I'm gonna try to stream tomorrow as well, of course. So if you want to be alerted, there should be some kind of bell or subscription or something you can click. Thanks for both the stream and my insights. No problem. So yeah, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope to see you guys again tomorrow for another stream. And I hope you try out NIM sometime if you haven't.